The Chair at this time would ask unanimous consent that our colleague from Florida, Congressman Vern Buchanan, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Okay. Glad to have you aboard, Congressman. Now, my friend from Massachusetts, Mr. Turney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Thank you for our witnesses and all of the folks that are taking the time to be here today as well. I did want to start by just addressing a concern that my colleague, Ms. Norton, had with what can we possibly do for those children that are aging out, so to speak, of the services on that. We did have in the Higher Education Opportunity Act a couple of years ago a provision that was carried in the House, and Senator Kennedy carried it in the Senate for colleges and community colleges to address programs of sustainability for at least those on the spectrum that were able to be addressed and be helped by that. Unfortunately, in the next iteration of the budget, it didn't get funded again. But I think we could all put some attention on that and deal with some families, at least on that, helping people have that ability. And I would look forward to others on this committee that might feel that that's worthwhile pursuing on that, and we could do that again and perfect it a little bit, please. Dr. Boyle, you mentioned in answer to Mr. Burton's question that since 2000, thimerosal was removed from all of the vaccines except the multi-vial for vaccines on that basis. Can you answer me why, just as a matter of precaution to eliminate that whole issue, it isn't removed from them as well?
Actually, I said since 2001, and I'm not a vaccine expert, but my understanding, and I will clarify for the record about this, is that the multi-use vials are needed in certain context from a international or global perspective. But I'll clarify that for you.
If you would, just
yes.
as wide as the necessity that they're used everywhere, it could be diminished in some way and substituted with others on that basis, I think would be helpful on that. Also, to either or both of you on that, is there a differentiation between incidence of diagnosed autism in other countries that as opposed to the United States? Is it a region specific? Are there other concerns like that, or is it generally the same pervasiveness throughout?
So in most developed countries that do have data on autism, the prevalence has been comparable, about 1%. There was a recent study that was supported by Autism Speaks in South Korea. It showed a much higher prevalence, at 2.6 or 1 in 38 for a prevalence. That was done very differently. It was a community screening program or a study versus a different method that we use here in the U.S. I do want to mention one thing, though, within the context of our monitoring network here in the U.S. The prevalence varies considerably, so there are some states that have comparable prevalence rates to that South Korea study.
So what are we doing to sort of try to determine if there are higher rates in some states or some parts of some states than others? Are there a good number of studies going on trying to find out what's different about the environment in those areas than others, and how is that all being determined and coming out? What are the outcomes of those studies?
So our monitoring network continues to track the prevalence. We're trying to identify children at a younger age, so we have a component to identify children at age 4. We are doing studies to try to understand what's impacting that prevalence rate, both from a community perspective, understanding how children are identified and diagnosed in the community, as well as changes in risk factors, and modeling how those changes in risk factors over time might have influenced the rate.
So my colleague was talking about diet and other family incidents like that. Is there part of this monitoring that entails going into an area with a very high incidence of autism diagnosis and actually interviewing those families to find out what might be distinctive about their experience or their history?
That's a great question. And actually we have a second research program as well as many activities that are ongoing at the National Institutes of Health. So we have a research component in 6 states in the United States to do just that, to interview families, to get more detailed information from medical records, to compare families of children who have autism versus those who don't, and get a better sense of what's different.
And what stage are those studies? I mean, how far have they progressed?
So that's called the Study to Explore Early Development. We've just completed the first phase, so we have 2,700 families that have enrolled in that study, and we've started the second phase. So we are now in the analytic phase of that and really hope to be having data come out in the next year.
And other than a geographic way of identifying those people, are you doing something also with minority and low-income groups to determine why the prevalence is higher there, interviewing subsets of those groups?
So we are incorporating, so our studies try to get everyone in the population, and to get everyone in the population is always challenging. But that's what epidemiology is all about. It's to be representative of the population, so you don't have any bias there. So yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Gubmaka, you're the only pediatrician here today. And one of my other roles in life right now, is, besides serving in Congress, I'm also a grandfather for 7 children, 2 little girls, one 5 weeks old today, and the one will be 4 weeks old on Sunday. So are you saying that somehow that there's a window of the first year that parents should be looking at different behavioral activities in these children to maybe get an earlier idea that the child may be affected?
Yeah, absolutely. We do think the first year and potentially before that is crucial. It's interesting, for instance, that the NIH and others supported a study that was done in San Diego, which involved local pediatricians doing a survey of their patients, a quick office-based 5-minute kind of questionnaire to try to diagnose children with autism at about 1 year of age to see whether this could be done. Not only did that study show that it could be effective, it was so convincing to the pediatricians that when the study was over, and therefore funding it was over, all of the pediatricians in the study elected to continue to do that in their practices because they were so convinced that this was important for their patients. So I think absolutely more and more we want to make the diagnosis early because then we can get interventions and services to kids and the families in a way that we can make a difference, and the earlier we start them, the better the impact.
Okay. Dr. Boyle.
This is key since we don't know how to prevent autism, and we do know there's great benefits from early identification. We want to identify children as early as possible, and CDC has a campaign. It's called Learn the Signs, Act Early, and it's really targeting parents and healthcare providers, and it has tools to really help parents as early as 3 months, 1 month, to understand what the appropriate developmental milestones are. So your daughter, your daughter-in-law, really can take advantage of those materials.
Well, my wife and I spend a lot of time with them, so I mean, it would really be
You
important
too.
also.
Okay.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
I'm always holding them, doing something with them. And the older ones I'm reading to, I should be looking for things that I would never been aware of before. Now, I do represent an area that has impoverished rural areas, and I'm sure a lot of the members feel the same way because we don't all represent just one group of people, but a lot of people. So how are people in the impoverished areas, how do they get access to this? How do we get to them? How do we give them the opportunity to find out what it is that they need to know also? Is there a method that, I keep hearing people, they can go online. Well, you know, the area that I represent,
Right.
there's not a lot of people that can go online to do this. So,
Well, one thing I think neither Dr. Goodmacher or I brought up today is we represent 2 agencies within the context of HHS, and there are others that are represented in the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee that are whose voices you need to hear about too. So the Health Services Resources Administration focuses on training physicians in rural areas to really try to target, and then our colleagues in the Administration on Developmental Disabilities also do work here, Department of Education. So there are there's a lot of work here, and you're just hearing really from the 2 of us. And the IACC is really trying, and I know it has its challenges, but it's really trying to bring together all of those voices in the federal government in a coordinated way, so that we can really help everyone, you know, really be the group that reaches out to all.
okay. Doctor, do you have any follow-up?
I would just say that there are various regional approaches. Before I came to the NIH a number of years ago, I was the only medical geneticist in the state of Vermont, rural area. and saw numerous families and kids with autism. And that was part of a regional network that tried to approach the questions, the particular challenges of providing both good diagnosis and good care to kids in rural areas. It's a difficult challenge, as it is in any area that has barriers to access, be it rural or urban. There are various kinds of government programs that try to do that.
No, and I thank you. Dr. Boyle, anything on the horizon at all, anything you see coming that could be a cure?
Again, we've been focusing on understanding the preventable causes versus the cure part.
Okay. Well, I want to take this opportunity. Mr. Burton and I share an awful lot of passion for a lot of different things, but we're both grandparents. I've often said if we could ever exchange and take the place of whatever it is that our children or our grandchildren, we would gladly do so. So I thank you. He's departed again, but what a great effort. And I think Mr. Meehan hit the nail on the head. We will continue to pursue this as long as we can. You deserve an answer, and we'll keep working towards that means. Okay, right now, is Mr. Lynch is not here.